Welcome to episode number 28. I have a special guest today, Tammy Robinson. We're going to be sharing 5 helpful tips in dealing with the weight of grief without sabotaging your weight loss or health goal.
Hi, I'm Clarinda, and you are listening to the Feel Light, Mind and Body podcast, created for women like you. Women who are experiencing success in so many areas of life, but are struggling with weight loss, stress eating, and decreased energy. Losing weight can feel hard, heavy, and restrictive. That's why every week I will be offering you a different perspective, tips, encouragement, and a unique approach so that you can feel lighter in your mind and body rather than feeling deprived, frustrated, or discouraged. What if you could feel free, yet in control around food for the rest of your life? What if you could enjoy your experience of losing weight and getting healthier? You absolutely can. You're in the right place. Take this time for yourself and let's dive in.
Tammy, it's so great to have you as my very first guest on this Feel Light, Mind and Body podcast.
Thank you for having me. It is a great honor.
You, my friend, definitely have experience on this subject and also a new book out. Can you share a bit about yourself and your book?
Yes. Well, I am a wife, mother of 3. I am a Grammy and a great Grammy of a 6-month-old baby boy.
Yes. That is special.
Yes, it is. I haven't met him yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, soon?
We have no plans except the summertime, so it's very vague.
Okay. That's at least a part of a plan.
Yes. So yes, I have had my share of grief. I had a 6-month-old daughter pass away. Also, I've been taken hostage at gunpoint in Guatemala.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
First of all, I felt that in my heart because I can only imagine the loss of losing a daughter. And then like gunpoint, that's just, that fear that would be there I just can't imagine.
Yes, that's definitely a story to tell. One important thing to know about grief is that it's the natural response to the loss of anything or anyone that's important to us. So I've written this new book called Stories of Good Grief, and it's 20 different people telling their story about grief and how they worked through it. Because although grief doesn't ever leave us, we learn to live with it and be happy and light again.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I love how you succinctly said that. I'm just going to repeat it again for my listeners, that phrase. Grief is a natural response to the loss of anything, which, as you know from me, just from our conversation, that was the life I had. That was my experience as I had imagined growing old with my daughter's dad and enjoying the richness of family life and all the memories that go with it, and future grandkids. So that was the loss of the thing. And then you also said grief is a loss of anyone important to us. And again, that doesn't have to involve the death, right? Death of a life. It can be a relationship. And the last part I love is when you said we can be happy and feel light again.
That's right.
Even though it feels in the moment that it's the end.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Grief is such a broad and important subject. So I can see why you felt like that book had to be written, especially with your experience. Now, do you share, like when you mentioned about that gunpoint, is that in your book as well?
Actually, I don't share that part in this book. I will be sharing it in my memoir, which I'm going to write later this year. Okay. But in this book, I do share about when my daughter Wendy died. I wrote a chapter about that. And then in the middle of working on this book, my mother-in-law passed away. So I actually wrote an epilogue to the book to talk about the similarities and the differences between the death of my daughter and the death of my mother-in-law.
Okay. That'll be a valuable contrast too, to see that because it's so different for everybody.
Yes.
So today in this time frame, there's so many things we could cover, but I want us to focus on the impact that grief has on the heaviness that we have, that we carry in our minds and bodies. And then ultimately the fluctuation in our weight and overall health. So do you think we can do that?
Absolutely. Yes, there's a definite connection between the two.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I'm also curious about other things that we talked about before we hit record, but we'll constrain ourselves, okay, to keep us within this time frame. And to my listeners, this might go over my usual 10 to 20 minutes, and that's okay. That will happen when I have guests on. So I made a couple of notes, and one thing is just to say that grief is different for everyone, but it has some commonalities. And in nursing, we use the Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So I'm curious, Tammy, if that's what you use, or I know there's another one that's 7 stages, which has the original 5 stages, but then they add in guilt, an upward turn, and reconstruction.
I actually use Granger E. Westberg's 10 Stages of Grief. He wrote a booklet called Good Grief, and it was tremendously helpful to me when my daughter died. He talks about some of the ones that you've mentioned, but he also talks about shock, expressing emotion, and physical symptoms, panic, resist returning, and hope comes through, and we struggle to affirm reality.
Okay, well, that's helpful. There's some different terminology there as well. So I'm assuming in your book, you break that down a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. In the introduction, I have a little explanation of each of the 10 stages.
Perfect. Okay, I won't go there then. I will put this on my list. And I know now my listeners, we have 2 books to explore, yours and his.
Yes.
So with most stressors, we tend to resort to coping strategies that aren't always good for us. They're not favorable. And that is if we leave it up to our automatic responses. It just tends to be part of our human nature. Part of that reason, as my listeners have heard me say on the podcast, the survival part of our brain is always looking for the easiest and quickest way to help us feel better. So I know you've gone through the Feel Light Mind and Body program. And so from your experience with grief, what stood out to you as something new or maybe reiterated what you already knew and supported what you shared in your book?
What I found that was important is being present and being aware. In grief, it is important not to fight the feelings and the stages, but to allow yourself to feel them. In the Feel Light Mind and Body program, we also learned that we need to be present and mindful to gauge our hunger level, as well as noticing why we eat. So I asked myself, where am I on the hunger scale? Am I really hungry or am I sad? Am I eating because I'm hungry or because it's a habit?
So true. We use food or alcohol as it's just one of the easiest and quickest ways to feel better. Or for some, it's to distract, to give us some kind of pleasure. Or I've done this, simply tap out so we don't have to think about it. Unfortunately, comfort eating and drinking usually are high in sugar and unhealthy fats with minimal nutrition. So then that contributes to more ill effects, us feeling like crap. Then there's a decreased motivation to cook or go out for groceries, which may also contribute to us ordering takeout or going through a drive-through, getting things delivered. And then those packaged foods that we can reach for that are just so quick and easy, we know that they increase our glucose levels, hence our insulin levels. And then there's less opportunity for the body to draw from the fat stores. Instead, it will be in fat storage mode, which again, you learned all this in the course, but so that my listeners could say, oh, yes, this makes sense.
Absolutely. Sometimes we feel bad and we have no energy to go to the store or to cook or even to eat healthy. Sometimes we just want those comfort foods, even though we only feel better for a few minutes and then we end up feeling worse afterwards.
Yep. I think we've both been there a few times or more. In fact, I'm sure everyone listening has been there, or they're in that autopilot mode right now with their current stressor. So if that's you and you're listening to this for a reason. Another aspect of the chronic stress response is that it releases more adrenaline and cortisol, which ultimately leads to stored belly fat. And then that can create an increase in inflammation. Gaining weight is not another problem that a grieving person needs because it just compounds to the suffering and will add to more unhappiness.
Yes, many people end up gaining weight because of unhealthy choices in what we eat and drink. For me, when I lost my daughter, Wendy, I lost a lot of weight, but then I gained it later.
Yeah, let's touch on that a little bit later as well. One thing I wanted to also mention with that stress is the impact that it has on the insulin response. It makes it harder for insulin to do its job properly and can lead to insulin resistance and diabetes. So do you and your doctor think that contributed to your experience?
Yeah, I have diabetes too, but my body has stopped making insulin. So now, even when I eat healthy, my sugar levels still rise.
Ugh, that's a challenging state. It's challenging in the best of times, and then you add in grieving to the scenario. So yeah, I can see why weight could easily creep up. We also know that adrenaline and cortisol cause an increase in blood sugar levels, which makes it harder to manage your diabetes and ultimately your A1C, the 3-month sugar level. We've recently shared a post regarding your A1C level. So can you speak a bit more on this?
For sure. Before I started the Feel Light Mind and Body program, my A1C was over 10. I had to start taking insulin before every meal. And I just had blood work done, and it showed that my A1C is now at 6.5. My doctor was thrilled. He even said it was a stellar result.
That is so awesome. I know when you sent me that message, I was like, woohoo.
Yeah.
So congratulations again, because as a nurse for 21 years, I know that took some changes in your mindset and your actions.
Yes.
Now, grief may also include a stage of losing weight, which you referred to earlier, due to a loss of appetite or that sick pit feeling in the bottom of your stomach. I don't know how else to describe it. But then your metabolism changes. Your body may go into a survival state of holding on to everything it can for fat storage. And then when you start to feel a bit better, you want to eat everything in sight, especially without this awareness and having the tools and tactics to deal with this. So anything else you want to add regarding that?
Yeah, the other side of grief, especially when we're in shock, is that we may not feel hungry and not want to eat at all. And that's what happened to me when my daughter died. I didn't have any desire to eat or to do anything.
Did you resonate when I said about that sick feeling that in your pit of your stomach? Did you have that? Or was it different?
Yeah. No, I definitely had that sick feeling. And remember, a 6-month-old baby, she totally relies on me as her mother. So I was carrying her everywhere. So I had a physical ache when she passed because I was used to carrying her, feeding her, changing her, everything. And so my life changed dramatically when she passed.
Literally my heart goes out to you. And you had mentioned at the beginning, before we hit record, I think you said it was 34 years this past Sunday?
Yes, this last Sunday, it was 34 years ago she died.
Wow. There's so much we could go into here, but we'll stick to our abbreviated notes we have. But yeah, my heart is feeling that for you, Tammy.
Thank you.
And I can remember also from my personal experience, making myself eat as I was determined to stay strong and healthy because of what I know from my education and experience. But I did not feel like it. For me, it was also the initial stage that I simply ate for fuel because I wasn't feeling any pleasure when I was eating and no desire. And that felt really foreign to me because I love food and I've always had a really healthy appetite. But the other drive for me was I was really scared that I'd get sick. And I just kept thinking, I don't have time for that. I had a lot of decisions to make and a lot of shifts. So I needed all that energy. So let's keep going. Tammy, I'd like to leave my listeners with 5 tips to help them with their weight loss or maintenance goal, even during the grieving process. And if not right in the middle of it, to be aware of it ahead of time, even if there's something that comes back to them when they're in the middle of the grieving process and it can help them, that's awesome as well. When we can do this, as small as it might be, it really is a true form of self-care. And I think it's too often left out, as we mentioned before, because our survival brain is more activated during grief. And usually we can tap into our higher level, the prefrontal cortex, a bit easier. That's the part of your brain that has your best interest in mind. So together, let's make it as simple as possible And what would you like to offer for tip number 1?
I think my tip number 1 would be to be present and mindful. Sometimes we feel numb and we don't want to allow ourselves to feel the pain. We think if we start crying, we're never going to quit. One person in my book set aside a time once a week where she went into a room. She put on the favorite music of her loved one who passed away, and she looked at pictures of him. She allowed herself to feel the pain. She allowed herself to cry for a set amount of time. This allowed her to feel the emotion, to be mindful, and to have control of the situation. In doing this type of exercise, we're building our mindfulness muscles. And when it comes to eating, we will be more mindful of that as well.
I love that. Having that set time as well is calming for our minds and our body ahead of time. And I can attest to this. I did the same thing. I gave myself time. I had a hammock at the time out on my patio, and that would be my place that I would say, between this time and that time, you can go out there, you can think about this, you can pray, you can cry, you can do whatever. And in doing that and knowing that was coming on, it just allowed me to stay focused more, a little bit better on the task at hand. I think that's so important because we need to allow and process and give some attention to our emotions because they need that space. They're kind of like a toddler who's like, Mom, Mom, Mom. And sometimes when we just give them that attention and acknowledgement, they just kind of calm down and you can carry on. So that was a great tip number 1. Tip number 2 would be to incorporate ways to lower the physical stress response. And a simple way is to just intentionally deepen the breath. Because when we're in that stress state, our breathing becomes more shallow and stays in our chest rather than going deeper into our belly. So you can simply focus on extending the length of your inhales or exhales. I like to do both. And just maybe take it from a count of, if you're currently in a 2 to 3 second cycle, extend it to 3 to 5 seconds. You can add in relaxing music and closing your eyes if that feels good and you're not triggered. And doing that also activates the parasympathetic nervous system instead of staying in that fight or flight mode, which is why we are in this shallow breathing mode. Another way is to move your body in a gentle way. We know that we probably are going to feel more tired than usual. So I think it's really important not to beat ourselves up. Especially, I know I hear, I can't seem to do a hard workout. Well, guess what? You don't need to release any more cortisol right now. So I just say, allow your body some rest time, but move it. Because when we move our body, we're also moving the energy that can get stuck in our body.
I love what you said, especially the part about breathing. One thing that I learned is your breath is always with you. So no matter where you are, if you're having a panic attack, and it could be due to grief, but you can always take that time to just change your cycle to a 3-5 cycle and take those deep breaths. They really help.
Yeah, it's one thing that we can control, right? When we feel like everything's out of control. I love that. You always have that with you. And that's a tool. That's a free tool, which I love.
Absolutely. So for tip number 3, I think it is helpful, especially during the stage of shock and panic, when we feel that we're in a downward spiral and we feel like we're out of control. This is something very simple we can do, is to put our wrists under cold water, or we could wash our face with cold water. Especially that coldness, it shocks our system, and it can be what we need to just jerk us out of that spiral that we were in.
Yeah, it just brings you right back to the present, right? Like, this is where I'm at right now. This is really similar to what I use in the Feel Light Mastery group. I told them that they could hold an ice cube in their hand and to just let it melt. And I used that as one of the grounding techniques when that was the focus that month. So for tip number 4, I would say choose one healthy habit to stay committed to. It can be whichever one feels the easiest or gives you the best result. Any chronic or acute stressor can knock you out of your healthy habits. If that's prolonged, then it can feel overwhelming to get back to them again, especially without support and encouragement.
That's good. So tip number 5, I would say, is to read stories that comfort you. For me, it was stories of near-death experiences when people also experienced heaven. I also enjoyed books on grief because they helped me to realize that I'm not alone and that I'm not going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's how you feel when you're in the middle of grief.
Absolutely.
And the different stages of grief can wreak havoc on our systems. We think we've worked through one stage, but then it comes back again, and sometimes even stronger. Or maybe another stage will come at the same time. Even if it's difficult to concentrate on reading, it can bring us comfort. That's the main reason why I wrote my book, to bring comfort to people.
Oh, I'm glad you shared that, because I think people can sometimes get frustrated and think, why am I back in this stage again? And to just know, your book is going to educate us on it's okay. It's similar in the weight loss journey when we think, we're the only ones that must do this. It looks like everyone else has it all figured out, or that they, we always see the highlight reels. So we feel like, they're moving forward. They got this transformation. What's wrong with me? Why am I struggling? When we don't know that same person went through the same thing over and over again, making that same, putting it in air quotes, mistake, thinking that they didn't have any of those along the way. So the fact that we go back through those grief cycles, I think it's very important for us to know. I'm also glad that you mentioned reading as being helpful, along with the challenge of it being harder to concentrate. Because I remember looking at books and wishing I felt like reading. And again, I made myself read a paragraph here and there. And then for me, it was effective to put pen to paper to see what came out. I'm not sure I would have done that before life coaching, because that would again feel like too much energy that I didn't have at the time. But I guess I knew what I was being taught of how powerful it can be and how healing in the end. So I just made myself do it. And that, along with prayer, was very therapeutic and healing just to do that. Looking back though, I wonder if listening to audiobooks would have been more doable, because I did listen to some podcasts, even though I couldn't concentrate on one more than 15 to 20 minutes. So sometimes it would take 2 to 3 days to get through one, but just having that different perspective, that extra voice and reassurance, it gave me hope.
Oh, that's great. That kind of confirms what I've been thinking. And that is that I want to put my book on audiobook as well. So that'll be available soon.
Okay, good. So this mental, emotional, and physical stress impacts our lives, impacts our health at all levels, especially when it continues into a chronic stress category. It's one of the reasons it's so important for us to get help while going through the stages of grief, which, as we mentioned, includes going back and forth between them and even skipping stages. It's really individualized, though. So I want to emphasize to all those listening, please don't judge others or yourself on your stage and progress. Tammy, is there anything else that you feel to share that will be helpful and encouraging?
Yeah, like you said, it is individualized. Not everyone goes through every stage. And just because you experience one stage doesn't mean you won't experience it again. Just to reiterate, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Grief is one of the hardest things we deal with in life. And if we allow it to, it can make us stronger people. I'd like to leave our listeners with a visual.
Oh, I like that. I'm a visual learner. Keep going.
So I experienced this in a class on mental health. Imagine that there is a piece of paper taped to a wall and you're asked to draw a picture of a tree. Before you begin drawing, I give you a blown up balloon and I ask you to hold it in one of your hands. And with your other hand, you draw the tree. So your tree looks pretty good. Then I ask you to draw another tree. This time, however, I tell you, you can't hold the balloon. You must keep it up in the air while drawing a picture of a tree. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to draw while tapping this balloon in the air and keeping it off the floor. This exercise shows us that it's much more effective to allow ourselves to express our feelings and to be mindful of how we're feeling. It helps us to feel that we're in control, especially at a time in our lives where we're tempted to feel out of control. I hope this helps everyone.
Oh, I'm sure it will, because as you were describing it, I could just feel the overwhelm of trying to do all the things. And I think back to your first tip of being present and giving yourself a set time to deal with the many emotions bubbling up or simmering below the surface, along with the swirling thoughts. If we take that time, it will also make the task at hand in your visual example of drawing a tree more doable and less stressful. Thank you so much, Tammy. This has flown by already. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your wisdom. So can you tell us where we can find your book or connect with you?
Absolutely. So people can email me at Tammy, Tammy, at TammyRobinsonAuthor.com.
How do you spell Robinson?
Robinson.
Okay.
So Tammy at TammyRobinsonAuthor.com. They can go to Amazon and just type in Tammy Lee Robinson, and Lee is spelled Leigh. And when you put that into Amazon, you'll see all three of my books there.
Oh, what are the titles of the other books?
The first one is Nameless, A Story of Faith. And the second one is Nameless, A Story of Courage. And they are the first two books in a trilogy. Next year, I'll write the third book.
Okay, awesome.
And I'm also on Facebook at Tammy Robinson Author 2018.
Well, Tammy, even though we have never met in person yet, I've enjoyed working with you through Zoom on your weight loss journey, and then now here on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, not a problem. It's my pleasure, and it's adding value to my listeners. I'm all for it. And I'm so glad our paths crossed, but I am curious, how did you first find me? I don't remember how we first connected.
Actually, it was a friend of mine that I go to church with, and I noticed that she was losing a lot of weight and she looked really great. So she told me about your program.
Okay. I have a feeling now it's coming to me who it might be.
Yeah. And then it was interesting because I had talked to you about it. I hadn't made a decision, but I had pretty much decided. And then I was in a restaurant and I saw your business card on the board. And I said to my husband, actually, it was my husband that said, "Isn't Clarinda Price the name of that lady you were talking to?" So that means it was meant to be.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. I love it. You never know those random, sometimes I think that's the one that I would have put at as I was driving to my mom's, and I do a little pit stop. And I think it was during COVID, actually, when I was waiting to get into the washroom. I was like, I'll put one of those up there. So I guess that was for you.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing and caring and for showing up here. And I'm excited for you because I know that when we take our pain, our experience, and turn it into purpose in helping others, not only are we blessing others, but we also get that blessing in return. So I wish you all the best, Tammy.
Thank you, Clarinda. I appreciate that. You said it so beautifully. Thank you.
You are so welcome. And it was my pleasure for sure. And to you, my listener, I'd love to hear from you on which tip you needed to hear or found helpful. And if there's anyone in your life right now who could benefit from this episode, as always, feel free to share and spread the hope and comfort of knowing that you are not alone and that you are thinking about them. It really does go a long way. Once you've been in a stage of grief, you really have an appreciation and compassion for others. Let's be a share of light on maybe one of their darker days.
Now, do yourself the biggest favor. From love, take at least one action step from what you learned today. Knowledge without application won't give you the results that you desire. Let me know on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever, what you are choosing to do and when. And yes, please leave a podcast review wherever you are listening to this. When people read your words and can see themselves in them, then you are contributing to women empowering other women. And that feels amazing. You just might change or save a life today.